we're going to play a little game. Let me see how many times my computer can get locked up. I'll tell you, this is the first time it happened on air. So what we're talking about, we're talking about this document here. Gateway process, brain hemisphere syncing, and this idea of biofeedback, right? You had the hypnosis, you had transcendental meditation, which puts acoustic waves using your heart into your brain. Then you have this idea of biofeedback, measuring the biology, what's going on in your body. And what I was showing you when I was so rudely interrupted by Zoom, which is owned by China, and or by Apple, which basically is owned by China, even though they say they're an American company, they really don't give a shit about you. So what I was talking about was this watch here, and this watch can do things like read your brain. And the interesting thing about this watch is it's a real thing. The guy who made it was from NASA, or worked for NASA, I should say. And this is a real thing. He works in Silicon Valley now. Last name is Freer. And it literally is able to do things like this. Transmit your thoughts over the internet, right here. Transmit your thoughts over the internet or Wi-Fi to another person. Obviously, it's proprietary. When you think about something like an Apple Watch, being able to read and understand your body, what you have here are little electrodes, and you have an antenna. Well, so does the Apple Watch, right? So we're talking about biometrics and biofeedback, and why it's important, because they can understand what's going on with your brain and your body by extracting things out of your nervous system. And not only can they extract things out of your nervous system, the receiving device, right? The receiving device, so something's transmitted and received to a watch on your wrist, for example, by methods of magnetically, and magnetically means transcranial magnetic stimulation. So what they're talking about here is this antenna right here is able to stimulate your brain even though it's on your wrist, or stimulate someone else's brain even though it's on your wrist. And I'll show you that here in a second. So here you go. This is reading this individual's brain at a distance, and it's using that antenna that's in the watch. Well, the antenna in your watch that you have, maybe not, I should restate that. The antenna that's in a smartwatch is designed to interact and function with your phone or the cell network. One of the benefits and the features and the cool little functions of an Apple smartwatch, for example, is this ability for it to talk to the cell network as well as be able to talk to your phone. So it does that with an antenna in it. This antenna talks about being a coil antenna, and they have those in watches, and they have other antennas. Typically it's an inverted F antenna, planar F antenna, but we'll get into that later. But the real important piece here is that not only can they read what's going on with it being in contact with your skin with the electrodes on the back, they can also use the antenna to read someone else's brain or body information. And this other little piece here that talks about encoding digitized information as a neural message, right? So you're translating it to biologic code that is then injected. It's injected into your peripheral nervous system. For example, using transcranial magnetic stimulation of the visual areas in the brain, indirectly modulating neural activity through rapidly changing magnetic fields. Your phones have these antennas too, folks. The new ones are even more sophisticated. Or electrically, going back to the watch, the array of sensors on or under the skin, so the ones that are on the skin, the electrodes on the skin, can be used in combination as a neurostimulation method to exchange information between brains directly in neural code. And what am I getting at here? Here's a picture of an Apple Watch. This is a Hermes. It's real nice, it's sleek, it's sexy. Electronic device. This is an Apple Watch. It's a patent from a while ago. So you've got light sensors and you've got electrodes. Electrodes are all around here. There's a conductive housing. There's electrodes here. These surfaces that don't look like metal can also be conductive. They can spray this stuff on there and it can be atomically thin. It can be atomically thin and be conductive, and it can be transparent. You can see through it so it'll look like glass even though it's conducting electricity. And why am I telling you all this? I'm telling you all this about a watch because it's just one example of measuring this biofeedback. This biofeedback so that when you're stimulated, either by yourself, like self-stimulation through meditation or otherwise, or if you're potentially, stimulated by something like modern technology, therapeutic electromagnetic fields. These things literally interact with your nervous system and your brain to do things like restore function in your brain and your nervous system after trauma and stroke or a spinal cord injury using a coil antenna or a regular antenna or some other conductor, right? This is done with 10 Gauss or less. Can be done with 10 Gauss. You can look up 10 Gauss, and it is a ridiculously small amount of magnetic energy. Talks about having unique frequencies in the brain, being able to resonate unique frequencies in the brain while applying electromagnetic energy to the entire body, because every neural circuit and every piece of the brain have their own unique brain resonances. So you can apply a unique recipe of electromagnetic energy to the body, and it will impact one nervous system circuit or brain region or combination of those things. It will impact that more efficiently than the rest of the body. This company, BrainQ, is out of Israel, and they are funded by Google. They are funded by IBM. And they are in the business of using artificial intelligence and cloud computing and cloud-based AI to interact with the brain and the nervous system using electromagnetic fields. And they can enhance brain activity. In this case, what they can do is they can control, right? It says here that they can instruct the transmitter to provide a resonant effect, thereby inducing newly generated brain cells, which are done so in the olfactory center in your brain. New cells are made as the old ones die. They got to be replaced. The body tells them where to go. Well, they can override that process with electromagnetic fields, and they can steer where new brain cells go towards the brain tissue, right? In the case of this medical application, it's towards a pathology, an illness, or an injury, or a lesion, right? And initiating new brain pathways at the brain region of interest, which means that they can grow and set new neural circuits in your brain. They can rewire your brain. They can groove your brain, retrain your brain, Pavlovianly, Pavlovianly interact with your brain and your nervous system. How about those iPads in everybody's hands? What about the children, folks? What about this distance learning? What about the COVID hoax? What about this No Child Left Behind? What about these mobile devices, digital devices put into every single classroom, into every child's lap, so that you have, 30 or 40 of them radiating, sending and receiving in multiple Wi-Fi routers for, a minimum of 8 hours a day, and then the child goes home and dinks around on it for another 4 hours. How many hours is a person exposed to antennas and electromagnetic fields on a daily basis? Half of a day, 12 hours on average, you'd say, maybe more, considering a lot of television now is watched on a mobile device. Nervous system frequency is one of the factors governing the activation of the nervous system. The present invention is already enabled to the extent that the innovative technology can identify brainwave frequencies which can be associated with a specific disorder of the nervous system and the appropriate brainwaves that are utilized in recovery treatment. Gee, when I read that, I see that there is a catalog or a database being able to identify how to disrupt and how to correct specific circuits in the brain. Why am I going here with this after the Apple Watch and the biofeedback thing, right? Because what I'm talking about here is a closed loop system whereby stimulus can be applied to a human organism and it can then be read and understood. Apply a stimulus, observe and measure the effect. Apply a stimulus, observe and measure the effect. Apply a stimulus, observe and measure the effect. And did you give your consent for that? Do you think that every child in school should potentially be exposed to something like that? considering, I mean, you know, we have these viable technologies. This is just one company. They just happen to illustrate in their patents very well what antennas can do to the brain and the nervous system. This company, funded by Google and IBM, they're an Israeli company. This is another one. Regeneration of nerve fibers. So this is they literally able to regrow or grow nerve fibers so you can enhance, retrain, regroove, rewire a human. You can correct a nervous system injury like a spinal cord injury. You can correct that. So why people are walking around and or not walking around, right? Why are people in wheelchairs and walkers and crutches and all these different paralysis type issues? This technology exists. And I'm trying to illustrate for you just how close we are, if not already, at the point where something like your cell phone can interact to the extent that may be offensive in nature. Offensive in nature. Generating electromagnetic treatment protocols for the nervous system. Protocols for the nervous system. It sounds like heart medication or insulin or, you know, some type of chronic issue that has many different medications that may be applied based on what other underlying conditions you may have or other medications that you're on. You know, a protocol, just a protocol. Some people, healthy people, right, might use nutrition or nutraceuticals or supplements as protocols. But what this is talking about is protocols for the nervous system. Yeah, the thing that, you know, controls everything in your body, including your consciousness. Controls your heartbeat, controls your breathing rate, controls whether or not you piss yourself. That stuff. All that stuff. We'll get back into this document in a minute, but I'm not done showing you about this idea of biofeedback. Biofeedback is somewhat unique in that it actually employs the self-cognitive powers of the left hemisphere to gain access to such areas of the right part of the brain, such as the lower cerebral motor functions, right? Head, shoulders, knees and toes, yeah, motor functions, and secondary cortices. Biofeedback is able to measure what's going on electrochemically, more so electrically, but electrochemically because they're directly related in your body. So it doesn't stop at the watch. When we're talking about being able to measure what's going on with the human organism, it doesn't stop at the watch. We also have earphones. And this talks about EEG monitors with capacitive electrodes to monitor your brain waves. Capacitive electrodes, you say. These things are electrodes that are either behind or on top of, but they don't necessarily have to make contact with the skin. Electrodes don't necessarily have to be made of metal. They have conductive polymers, conductive plastics, and they can spray atomically thin layers on top of plastic like iPod or AirPods to create electrodes. And if you don't believe me, I'll show you. Here are earbud devices with capacitive electrodes, and these babies come with every mobile phone made by Apple, because Apple loves you. Apple wants to know you better than you know you. You know what I'm saying? So these sexy, sleek, convenient, free, easy to use, intuitive little babies, these little jewels right here, many different colors and flavors, right? These babies have vapor deposited electrodes on them. These are electrodes so that when you can pause, play, volume up, volume down, all the cool stuff you can do, but there's no buttons on it, man. It's so cool. It's so fucking cool, man. Yeah. These electrodes here create capacitive sensors, which means that they have to have capacitive fields. So we'll finish through these. These measure biofeedback because your body's conductive. Look at these nice, sexy little headphones. The wired ones too. More pictures. These are all electrodes all around. So this is in your ear. This is making contact with your ear, which ties into the nervous system vagus nerve and the trigeminal nerves are literally inside and around your ear. And when you start looking at vagus nerve stimulation, they could do a lot of interesting things to any organ in the body that they want, because the vagus nerve runs all through your body and touches basically every single organ in your body. And these little babies make contact with your vagus nerve through your ear with these capacitive electrodes. Moving on. Apple and Beats by Dre partner earbuds with capacitive sensors. Beats by Dre. Beats by Dre, these are the Beats Tour. I used to have a pair before I knew what the heck they were, right? Look at these beautiful, sleek, awesome headphones. And what I want to show you here is that these little babies emit electric fields. These are conductive traces that are inside the headphones, and they are emitting electric fields. The whole point of this, mind you, why are we going down this, is to understand what biofeedback is, and to also realize that there is a potential to insert information in the form of neurologic code into the body with antennas or electrodes. And these electrodes that we're looking at here are no contact electrodes. They don't need to make contact. They create electric fields that interact with your skin the same way, yet a little bit different, but in the same ideological way as electrodes would on an Apple Watch that are literally a piece of metal or a conductive piece of plastic. And we'll continue. These sweet, sexy, wireless Tour. Everybody's got to have a pair. Next, Beats by Dre. These are the sports version, and this is where it gets really interesting, because these guys, you think those ear hooks are just for support, so when you're shooting hoops and pivoting and twisting and jumping and prancing around, being a badass on the basketball court, they don't fall out of your head? Well, guess what? That's a wire in there, and it's a segmented wire in there, and those segmented wires in there are electrodes, and they wrap around the backside of your ear, on the skin between the backside of your ear and around your head, and it again interacts with the vagus nerve and the trigeminal nerve, and is very close to many of the other facial nerves that all tie into your brain and your organs, and they can do interesting things with them. Show you some cool pictures, because everybody likes to look at Beats by Dre. They're a beautiful product. These happen to be one of my favorites. One of my favorites. And we'll move on. Here is a very popular model. Headphone with orientation sensors, right? These are all electrodes. All of them are electrodes, right? And when you look at something like this, you say, damn, that's a beautiful piece of engineering. That's just sexy. I want that. I really want that. Sounds so good. But what's really happening here is, the orientation sensors are all these electrodes, and you got them all over your ear and all around your ear, thereby being able to generate electric fields, capacitive fields. And in the patents, they talk about, well, we need to do this so we know if it's, on your head, if it's a little forward or backward, or if the left headphones on the right ear or the right headphones on the right ear. And, we could use this stuff to understand, noise cancellation and what the pressures and the tensions are. And we can do all this by measuring mathematically just what the field strength is, because we're able to do so by looking at the conductivity of your skin in these patents. Here's another set, just for your entertainment. Electrodes everywhere. And so this picture was to illustrate that even the outside, even in the earmuffs, even in the cushions that are pushing on your head have electrodes in them that generate capacitive fields, so the headphone can be oriented properly to provide you with the best sound experience. I don't know about you, but I sure want one. And not to leave out anybody else, this is Bose. And really the point of it is this, is to illustrate for you that it's not exclusive to Apple. What we're looking at here are universal biosensors. Universal biosensors, so that biofeedback can be fed into the data cloud. And when you look at the major players, Google, Twitter, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, am I missing some? You know if I'm missing some. Just add the extra names, add the extra icons and the extra apps that you like to use. Snapchat reminds me of a song. Reminds me of a song. Instagram, and on and on and on and on and on. This idea of having an app access all of the hardware on your phone and all of the devices that you attach to your phone that do things like have conductive traces in them to generate these electric fields to understand what is going on around the device. We've talked about watches. We've now talked about headphones. Let's not leave out one of the most important, commonly available, ubiquitous, and generally understood and accepted as spying type technology. The good old trusty camera. And the camera technology is really very interesting because it can estimate your brain activity by looking at the front part of your face, right here between the eyes and just above on the forehead. And they can look at the blood flow there, and they can understand a great deal about what's going on in your brain. Human brain activity can be estimated more easily. The brain activity estimation device can acquire photographed image data by a common camera. Common camera? You mean a common camera? Not a special camera? It doesn't need to be a DSLR. It doesn't need to be a high-def camera. Does it need to be a holograph camera? I mean, what kind of camera are we talking about here? A common camera. A common camera. Oh, okay. Aspects of the present invention wherein the photographed image data is acquired by an infrared camera. That's just one example. Well, we all have infrared cameras. Every camera is infrared. Typically, it's got a filter on it. Now, the infrared is used to do things like open your phone. So it has an infrared photoreceptor, photodiode in it, specifically for infrared. Do you know that your skin and your body emits infrared? That it can be read even without shining infrared on it? Did you know that when infrared light is shown onto the body, it penetrates basically 10 to 12 inches into the body, particularly if it's a focused laser? What about the dots? The dots. The dots, you say? How do you think they map your face? They grid your face with dots. They have a dot matrix that is emitted out of your phone, right? And it grids your face, and it understands three-dimensional orientation of your face and measures all of those things in three-dimensional space between each dot and maps your face. But those dots are focused beams of light. Otherwise, it would just be a floodlight. And no, it's not. It's a bunch of dots. Which means, to some extent, they're focused, coherent light. It's like a laser. And that stuff can penetrate and touch your nerves, penetrate your skin and your skull, and get into your brain. And the real interesting thing is that this lady, this creepy lady, Regina Dugan, former head of DARPA, moved to Facebook. Regina Dugan. If this will load. Regina Dugan's keynote at Facebook F8 in 2017. She talks about a brain-computer interface using near-infrared light and goes so far as to discuss how near-infrared light scatters through tissue and how they're able to use machine learning, complex algorithms to understand that scattering effect and predict the scatter effect to be able to get light into the body where they want it, to be able to read your speech and then convert it to text. So you can think 100 words per minute without typing on a keyboard. That's in this talk right here on humaninternet.org. It's on YouTube as well. You can go to humaninternet.org, go to the media section, and look up bio-machine interfaces, and you will find all kinds of really interesting information here. Brain-computer interface technology, Regina Dugan, former head of DARPA, Justin Sanchez, former head of the BTO section of DARPA, Dr. Philip Olveda, also part of DARPA. He's working on a neural interface device that's kind of similar to Elon Musk's, but this was years ago. Neural interface, Elon Musk's original Neuralink presentation. Organic material and devices for interfacing with the brain. Oh, really? More stuff with DARPA. Doug Weber. This guy works at Rice, I believe now. Don't quote me on that. One of the major institutions. He does some very interesting work. And Control Labs. I highly recommend you watch this one because this has to do with a watch and a wearable on your body that measures the muscle activity that really extracts and decodes your brainwaves. And Control Labs was bought by Facebook, I believe, last year. So Facebook now owns all of this technology. This guy's a former chief engineer with Microsoft. Yeah. And this guy, Justin Sanchez, used to work at DARPA. He's now at Patel, working on neural interface that do things like inject nanotech into your blood, use magnetic fields to steer it up to your brain, dope it so that the brain thinks it's food or something that it needs, so it passes the blood-brain barrier and then drops off things like genetic payloads to modify your brain cells with genetic information, and or to leave the magnetic nanoparticles in place to then use varying magnetic fields to create a bidirectional brain interface to talk and listen to your brain, to read and write to your brain. Patel has patents for that. And this is a cool video where one person is hooked up to another person and they move their arm and they think about moving their arm and it involuntarily moves the other person's muscles, moves their other arm. How to control someone else's arm with your brain. Neural dust, using ultrasound to interact with the nervous system. Anyway, it goes on and on. Oh, and then we've got a whole section on here about augmenting the brain with AI. So kind of digressing here because bioenergy interface is really a big deal. This is where we're going. This is where humans are jacked into the internet and we are basically enslaved, and free will becomes a matter of something that is told about the human species in the form of a history lesson, if it's even allowed. What free will used to be. Determining emotions using a camera, going back to biofeedback, determining emotions using a camera. Because it's measuring the different changes in your autonomic nervous system, it says right here. Measuring the activities or the arousal of the autonomic nervous system. Things like the change in the flushing of your skin, or being able to pixelate and understand the pixel outline of an artery in your neck or in your face. And when your heart rate goes up, it's able to measure the change in the pixel color that is the outline of your artery or your vein in your face, and it can measure your heartbeat. Pupil dilation, where your eyes move on the screen, your breathing and your respiration rate. All of these things can be put together to understand real-time evaluation of human emotions. Going back to biofeedback, because that's really important here. And I really want to emphasize that because big tech needs to get fucked up, in my view. Pardon my language, but I'm kind of angry about it. Because we're being raped, folks. We are being raped. We don't even know we're being raped. But hopefully after listening to this, you might have some clue about what raping might feel like. Your Fourth Amendment privacy, in addition to the removal of speech and the attack on the Second Amendment in order to put us into a state whereby we walk into serfdom and slavery and never come back. So that's why the F-bomb, or bombs, you might hear more. It's one of those days. It's just one of those days. So measuring your arousal, you know, do you like a blonde or a brunette? You like them thick? You like chocolate What happens when you see a big, fat, juicy burger? What happens when you hear the herbal essence commercial? What happens? Well, they know. They know what happens. They know. You have your own little profile in the cloud. If you don't believe me, I'll show you another patent under brain communication, right? Brain communication and remote control. Back in the 70s, an apparatus and a method for remotely monitoring and altering brainwaves. So they can use microwaves, radio waves, to measure and to change your state of mind. It says here that they can alter the natural brain waves in a desired fashion. They call it a closed loop compensating system using electromagnetic waves, permit instantaneous and continuous modification of brain waves. And it talks about being able to, this system also permits medical diagnosis of patients, going back to this idea of biofeedback. What do you think a doctor's doing when they take your temperature and they listen to your heart and they take your blood pressure and they check your reflexes, ask you questions? They are getting biofeedback to understand what's going on with you. That's a doctor. Well, they can do all this medical diagnosis of patients from remote stations. AI, folks, is a critical piece of the fourth industrial revolution, whereby humans are deleveraged, we are impoverished, we are put on welfare, and then the welfare is slowly removed based on our inability to comply with whatever the social mandates are. And it will be easy at first, and you will be rewarded at first, and as time goes on, the social mandates will become more and more and more and more unachievable, and you will be deleveraged and impoverished, and machines will ultimately supplant and take over the majority of human activity. This is where we're going, unless we get our arms wrapped around it and say no. And big tech is part of it all. They are the central driver of this. They are the centerpiece. They are the turkey on Thanksgiving. That is what big tech is to this fourth industrial revolution. And 5G is the trimmings and the stuffing and the gravy and the green beans and the scalloped potatoes and all of that. And a bag of chips. So the database. I was telling you about a database in your own profile, and you might think, nah, they don't care about me. But, well, they do and they don't. If you don't think they care about you, I ask you one question. How much do you value yourself? Is it you convincing yourself that you don't have enough value, and so through that self-reflection of how effective or efficient or valuable you think you are, and then try to estimate or compare what that value is to something like big tech, and if you don't think that you meet those expectations, you think they don't care about you, you're not there, right? You're not the one making that decision. And when you think about the monolithic Goliath type programs that exist with the billions and billions, trillions with a T, trillions of dollars that these companies have collectively that all work obviously in lockstep. I mean, we're seeing massive purges. So there is obviously corroboration and conspiring going on. And if you think it stops with turning off your account where you're typing or uploading a video, you're mistaken. Do you really think that trillions of dollars, year over year over year, trillions of dollars, do you think that the best that these companies have brought to humanity is being able to regulate what text comes through your phone or what video comes through your phone? I'm just saying. Think about it. Just think about it. This patent here that you're looking on the screen, right? Communication system including brainwave analysis or use of brain activity, talks about using a database. This is a method for enabling human beings to communicate by way of their monitored brain activity. The brain activity is monitored and transmitted to a remote location, for example, by satellite. The monitored brain activity is compared with pre-recorded, normalized brain activity curves, waveforms, or patterns. and to determine if a match or a substantial match is found. Then the computer, we could just say the cloud, because it's all of the above. It's computation, it's registration, it's orientation, it's regimentation, it's the catalog, it's the data storage, it's the algorithms, all of it, the cloud, right? So the cloud at a remote location, potentially in the hands of Google and Apple and Facebook. I mean, they are the monolithic, global, multinational superpowers that are supplanting entire fucking countries. We haven't even gotten to telecom yet, telecommunications companies. We're just talking about the edge providers, big tech. The platform is much larger than just the 6 or so quote-unquote big tech. How do you think they communicate? They use the internet. Hashtag 5G. So you have these groups, these clusters that are the brains, the nodes, the intelligent nodes that interconnect to themselves and to each other and to each and every one of you through your mobile devices and through the preloaded apps and through the preloaded crap that comes in everything and anything that's smart, that has smart in it or connects to the internet. Everything. Accesses the network. So big tech is one piece. When I say big tech, I'm talking like Google, Twitter, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, and on and on and on, right? But you also have big telecom. And this is the conspiring piece I'm talking about. This is the movement in lockstep that I'm talking about. This is the one group is pointing their finger at the other group saying, I'm not liable. And they leave us in the middle. Bear in mind, you're just bear down because you're being raped. Just bear down because you're being raped. So a database with pre-recorded normalized brain activity curves or waveforms or patterns, right? The computer at the remote location determines the individual was attempting to communicate a word, phrase, thought corresponding to a matched, stored, normalized signal. It's capable of identifying particular nodes in the brain, particular brain centers. And I've shown you now where electromagnetic fields can do this and they can resonate this. It doesn't require an implant with Elon Musk. It doesn't require cutting a hole in your head and injecting microwires so you can have some proprietary connection that Tesla is going to have that ties in with the Starlink network that's going to be integrated with the automated vehicles that he's creating that now has a $1.5 billion agreement with China to build that crap in China. And we know what China does with companies and their technologies in order to function and operate in China. Hello, Elon. So Musk is putting up a Starlink satellite grid that's going to be global. And he is hedging his bets internationally so that he has market share where he sees growth. So a multinational corporation that may or may not have loyalty to exclusively to the United States, setting up systems whereby electromagnetic radiation that is scalable is going to be beamed down around the world that we're not going to be able to control. We won't be able to have a say at that point. It will be in space. And we, the little people, will be on the ground, right? And he's selling this idea of putting a chip in your head with microwires that go around so that they can stimulate your brain and read your brain and rewire your brain and tie it into their networks. And these automated cars and the deals with other companies in particular, or countries, in particular China. So anyway, back to this database repository. Keep in mind that you're important and you're special and you're unique. And big tech knows that. So you have a file, whether you think you do or not, you have one. You do. It can understand simple words like yes or no, or phrases such as I don't know. It understands the difference between numbers. It understands your thought processes, your emotional content like depression and the like. Can be remotely activated to cause particular identified brain nodes to be fired in order to cause predetermined feelings, so they can manipulate your emotions or cause you to have a particular reaction, which may involve a physical reaction, hashtag mass shooter, And in the case of this patent, they give examples such as a lack of hunger, or a lack of depression, or a lack of thirst, or a lack of aggression, or a lack of Alzheimer's disease, right? And we go on and on in this section under remote control of brain activity. Again, humaninternet.org. All of this is here. I encourage you to read it. I encourage you to build your own spreadsheets, build your own little lists so that you can print these things out and look at them for yourselves. This, looking at patents, will train your brain. It will make you a more effective reader. It will make you a more effective critical thinker. If you take the time to suffer through the first few, you will get better at it. And you will understand how they're written. You will understand how to pick information out of complex technical legal documents that serve you in other facets of your life. What I'm talking about is challenging yourselves to become empowered. Empower yourselves. And an easy way to do it is to pick something like this that is coming online now and read and understand how to learn. Understand how to learn, because it will serve you well when you begin to critically think or have to interpret or decipher bullshit from any other source of information, be it words or videos or language and documentation. If you can do it in language and documentation, listening to people talk and watching videos is infinitely easier. That's why we've all kind of migrated to this multimedia platform rather than reading books. It's easier. So I'm challenging you to read. And I'm challenging you to read patents because they're difficult to read. And you will learn things out of them. This is protected, patented, protected property. Protected intellectual property, protected physical property. Electromagnetic brain activity, detecting it. Human brain activity, using Wi-Fi signals and cell phone signals. In this frequency range, they are able to understand all kinds of information, and this is cell phones and Wi-Fi, folks. Where are we at on time? Can't believe it. Been going at this for an hour already. This talks about manipulating your brainwaves, sensing and modulating neural activities. It's all here. There's also a nanotechnology section here. So let's continue on with this document. We'll see how far we get. Whatever we don't get to, we'll continue on in the next show. Should the internet, be working? Who knows at this point? So just spent an hour talking about biofeedback and stimulation into the human nervous system and the brain. 1 hour, minus the snafu in the beginning when my computer froze up. Ironically talking about big tech. We stopped on section 13. So this document talks about syncing the brain, left brain and right brain, doing so in a variety of ways in order to resonate with things like the earth. Bioenergy entrainment. As the body is turned into a coherent oscillator, vibrating in harmony with the surrounding electrostatic medium, so the surrounding environment or the surrounding artificial electrostatic medium. The specific exercises included in the gateway tapes, which are training tapes that were made, bear in mind, 1980s, early 1980s, so we're dealing with, right, 8-tracks and tapes, tape recorders, like, the kind that when they wear out, or you get your Walkman or your tape deck dirty, it ruins your tape and you got to peel all the tape out. For those of you that are, not that old, that might seem a little weird, but it used to happen. And it pissed you off when it did, especially if you didn't have a backup tape. Anyway, so it says here, presumably this surrounding electrostatic medium, right? presumably by using energy from the Earth's field, which the body is now in training because of its ability to resonate with it. So they're talking about resonating the body with the Earth's field. Puts the body's energy field into homogeneity with the surrounding environment and promotes movement of the seat of consciousness. Movement of your consciousness. Movement of the seat of your consciousness. The center point of your consciousness. Into the surrounding environment. Partly in response to the fact that the two electromagnetic medians are now a single energy continuum. So here we circle back to this idea of electromagnetics. Syncing your brain, getting it to resonate at 7.5 hertz or approximately thereof, nearby, the Schumann resonance, to sync with the earth, to transfer or move the seat of your consciousness into the surrounding environment, because the electromagnetic fields, the medians, are now a single energy continuum. Thus, the same process which moves the brain into focused coherence at steadily higher levels of frequency and amplitude so as to entrain analogous frequencies in the universe for data collection also promotes enhancement of bodily energy to a point adequate to permit the subject to experience an out-of-body movement when he is ready to do so. It says here, in addition, by resonating with the Earth's electromagnetic sphere, the human body creates a surprisingly powerful carrier wave. A carrier wave. To assist the mind in communication activity with other human minds, similarly tuned. We're talking about natural telepathy. Natural. Not this synthetic crap that I showed you today from that watch. And there are other patents from that guy that talk about being able to do this with other types of biosensors. Being able to extract your brainwaves out of your body, not out of your head. But being able to measure the electrical activity out of your body, pull away your heartbeat, and leaving nothing left but the brainwaves, and amplifying them up, and then putting them through a computer, and being able to read what's going on with your brain. Pulling it out of your body. And they could do this with no contact. There's another patent there that says they could do it with no contact. So, talks about consciousness and energy, holograms. We got into holograms a little bit. And we are now at section 13, and we will continue our read. So the parts encode as a whole. Of further importance is the fact that even if we dropped our frozen hologram of the ripple pattern on the floor and broke it into a number of pieces, each individual piece would recreate the entire holographic image all by itself. So what they're saying is, if you have a hologram and it's in ice, and they use this as an example, ice in a bowl. If you have a hologram in ice and you take the ice out of a bowl and it's a big piece of ice, you drop it on the floor, you can pick up one of the pieces and you get the entire hologram in a broken piece of ice. That's what they're talking about here. The key to creating any hologram is that energy in motion must interact with energy in a state of rest. In the foregoing example, the pebbles that were dropped into the bowl represent energy in motion, while the water that was still before the pebbles were dropped into the bowl were agitated by the pebbles. To activate, or in effect to perceive, the meaning of a holograph. Energy in this case, coherent light, a source such as a laser beam. Coherent light means all the waves are moving in the same direction at the same frequency and the same amplitude. That's how you get a laser. Very low power, works off little baby batteries, but that laser can shoot 100 yards. Coherent light, not incandescent light. All the light is focused. It's very, very specific. That's what they're talking about, a laser beam. Must be passed through the interference pattern generated by the interaction between the moving energy and the energy at rest. So what they're saying is you drop pebbles in a bowl, and as the pebbles drop, they create ripples, and then the bowl of water instantly freezes, and it captures all of those waves that are created. And the waves just aren't at the top. The waves are moving throughout the entire body of water in this bowl. And so what they're getting at is, if that thing instantly freezes when you have all these waves, you shine a light through it and you can see the interference patterns. where the waves are, how they're interacting with each other, and it's a very repeatable kind of a thing. There's structure to it, and that's the hologram piece they're talking about. And so when they drop this thing on the ground, what they're saying is they can pick up any one of those pieces of ice and they get the entire image of the hologram. And we'll move on. So a key piece of a hologram here is, another feature of a hologram is its efficiency. Billions of bits of information can be stored in a tiny space. The pattern of the holographic or photograph is stored everywhere on the plate. So, hologram. Most of us kind of know what a hologram is. We'll continue. The consciousness matrix. The universe is composed of interacting energy fields, some at rest and some in motion. It is, in and of itself, one gigantic hologram of unbelievable complexity. The consciousness matrix is a giant hologram. One giant hologram. According to the theories of Carl Pribom, a neuroscientist at Stanford, and David Bohm, a physicist at the University of London, the human mind is also a hologram, which attunes itself to the universal hologram by the medium of energy exchange, thereby deducing meaning and achieving the state which we call consciousness. So we have our own holographic computer that ties in to the gigantic single hologram that is the consciousness matrix flowing throughout the universe. Try to get your mind wrapped around that. It's a very interesting concept, especially when you think about this idea of electromagnetics and the common threads that exist there and throughout. What are we doing? What are we doing to our environment? Why are we doing it to our environment? What do they know that we don't? Why are we doing this? With respect to the states of expanded or altered consciousness, such as the gateway uses, which is syncing the brain in a specific way, the process operates in the following way. As energy passes through various aspects of the universal hologram and is perceived by the electrostatic fields which comprise the human mind, the holographic images being conveyed are projected upon those electrostatic fields of the mind and are perceived or understood to the extent that the electrostatic field is operating at a frequency and an amplitude that can harmonize with it and therefore read the energy carrier wave pattern passing through it. So what are they getting at here? What they're getting at here is that getting your brain to sync up and putting it in a specific brainwave pattern or a specific combination of brainwaves, making a pattern, not just one frequency, but many frequencies perhaps that are working in symphony with each other. Doing this where the left brain and the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain are doing this simultaneously in resonance. What they're getting at here is it accesses this universal holographic field. It accesses the consciousness matrix, the universal consciousness matrix, and is able to extract and or exchange energy, which is also synonymous with information. What is it that's happening when you pray? What is it that's happening when you meditate? What happens when you are inspired, when you have a epiphany, a eureka moment, or a discussion with the divine? What's going on there? When you mechanically or scientifically try to quantify and understand it. That's not to say that you're dismissing it or discrediting it. It's literally just human nature to try to understand what's going on with something once you conceive or conceptualize an idea. And this idea of prayer or connection with a higher power or tapping into the universal consciousness field, it kind of dancing around the same thing. And this is coming from military intelligence, Department of the Army. So, we'll continue. As energy passes through various aspects of the universal hologram and is perceived by the electrostatic fields which comprise the human mind, the electrostatic fields within the human mind, the holographic images being conveyed are projected upon these electrostatic fields in the mind and are perceived or understood to the extent that the electrostatic fields in the mind are operating at a frequency and amplitude that can harmonize with the holographic images and therefore read the energy patterns passing through it, passing through your mind. Changes in the frequency and amplitude of the electrostatic field which make up the human mind determines the configuration and hence the character of the holographic energy matrix which the mind projects to intercept meaning directly from holographic transmissions of the universe. What does that mean? That means that there is this universal energy field. It comes in many flavors, comes in many resonances, comes in many amplitudes, comes in many frequencies. Your brain functions differently than anyone else's brain. It is unique like a fingerprint. So when you tune in to the same vibration, so to speak, as somebody sitting next to you, you're getting kind of the same thing, but not exactly. And this is dancing around the idea of quantum mechanics, whereby the observation in quantum mechanics affects the measurement in quantum mechanics. So because your brain is different than someone else's brain, the measurement is fundamentally changed because the point of measurement is different, your brain versus somebody else's. We're talking about energy, electrostatic fields from the universe passing through and interacting with the electrostatic fields in your brain to exchange information. And again, I ask you, what is prayer? What is meditation? What is communion with the higher power? What does getting in touch with the earth look like? Changes in the frequency and amplitude of the electrostatic field which comprise the human mind determine the configuration, unique person to person, and hence the character of the holographic energy matrix. Matrix is the same, but the way it's perceived is different person to person, which the mind projects to intercept meaning directly from the holographic transmissions of the universe. Then, to make sense of what the holographic image is saying to it, the mind proceeds to compare the image just received with itself. So it's trying to make sense of what it is it's interacting with. And that's no different than how you interact with everything around you right now. You see what's going on, you hear what's going on, you smell what's going on, you taste what's going on, you feel what's going on. Those sensations are occurring and you have to process what they mean. You have to try to understand what those sensations or sensory inputs are, what they are. This is no different. This is just another type of sensory experience, another type of interaction. That voice in the quiet place of the Most High. For some of us. To make sense of what the holographic image is saying to it, the mind proceeds to compare the image just received with itself. The mind is comparing the image it's receiving with itself. Same thing we do everyday life. Specifically, it does this by comparing the image received with that part of its own hologram, the brain's own hologram, which constitutes memory. By registering differences in geometric forms and in energy frequency, the consciousness perceives As psychologist Keith Floyd puts it, contrary to what everyone knows is so, it may not be the brain that produces consciousness, but rather consciousness that creates the appearance of the brain. Makes you wonder what we are. Are we just antenna receivers? And I'm saying that facetiously. I'm not trying to dismiss or besmirch or whittle down what humans are. We are amazing creatures. We're beautiful creatures. But this idea of consciousness, universal consciousness, tapping into it, being part of it, interacting with it. What are we? What's our part in that? Why are you here? What are you doing while you're here? Why are you here? What are you doing while you're here? Brain in phase. The consciousness process is most easily envisaged if we picture the holographic input with a three-dimensional grid system superimposed over it, such that all of the energy patterns contained within it can be described in terms of three-dimensional geometry using mathematics to reduce the data to a two-dimensional form. Interesting. So, three-dimensional grid, understand the hologram, and then being able to process it so that it turns into a two-dimensional geometry to reduce the data into a two-dimensional form. Brain in phase. Bentov states that scientists suspect that the human mind operates on a simple binary go or no-go system, a yes-no meter, a go, no-go meter, something like that. So what they're saying here is that all digital computers are the same way. And I'm going to digress for a second and say, don't think that because you're hearing all digital computers that it's all computers, right? Because quantum computers don't really function this way. Not in a binary sense. They don't really function go or no go. Quantum computers function in this term of probability, where it's everything and it's nothing. But the likelihood of it being something versus something else, there is a probability there, a percentage of it being blue or green versus green. Up versus down, left versus right. Quantum computers function in a world of probability. Digital computers, what we all use right now, they're simple on or off, 1 or 0, yes or no, go or no go. That's what they're talking about here. And they're saying that the human mind operates on a simple binary go or no go system. Now, I disagree with that. I think there are components of that that are true, but there are also, just talk to a female. And I'm not saying that in a derogatory fashion. I'm saying that in a complimentary fashion. Because it's not that simple. Nothing is that simple. It's a very different fundamental characteristic between male versus female, generally speaking. And to try to convince a female that everything in their brain is a simple yes or a no, I don't think most women would agree with that. I don't agree with that. And I'm a male. So some things are that way in the way that we perceive information. This is just my opinion. But I think our brains function more so like a quantum computer in this world of probabilities. And based on all of the stimuli going on at any given moment, you understand, hear, and perceive things a specific way. And if stimuli in that particular moment were different, you may perceive it differently. Case in point would be this. You're listening to calm, gentle, classical music. And you're trying to work out. How intense or effective is that workout going to be? Versus upbeat, fill in the blank, rock, rap, trance, electronic, whatever. Upbeat, energetic type music and you try to work out. What's it going to be? And that's not a no-go or a go type of a situation. There is influences at play there that affect how you react. So to some extent, I agree with what they're saying about the brain here, but there's more going on than just the brain being an on or off mode, or a circuit in the brain being an on or an off mode. That is where I think big tech, so to speak, wants us to be. Where you receive a piece of stimuli and there is a known expected response. Conditioned, Pavlovian, conditioned response. You see something that is socially unacceptable, so to speak, and all of a sudden you're indignant or offended or whatever. And it's the same response for everybody. They want a homogenized society whereby stimuli gives them a 1 or a 0 in the mind of man, removing this idea of a fluid, probabilistic, creative, intuitive, spiritually responsive human. We are being engineered to be a 1 or a 0 human, rather than the dynamic, flexible, pliable, elastic minds and consciousness that we are. And we'll continue. Therefore, in this case, right, brain, binary, 1, 0, right? Once it superimposes a three-dimensional matrix over holographic information it wishes to intercept and reduces that information mathematically to a two-dimensional form, it can completely process it using its fundamental binary system, just as any computer made by the hand of man. And there it is in the document right there, folks. Can process volumes of data and make various comparisons between the data and information stored in its digital memory. Our minds operate in the same way, perceiving by comparison only. Bentov states the proposition this way: our whole reality is constructed by constantly making such comparisons. Whenever we perceive something, we always perceive differences only. In states of expanded consciousness, the right hemisphere of the human brain, in its holistic, nonlinear, nonverbal mode of functioning, acts as the primary matrix or receptor for this holographic input, while by operating in phase or coherence with the right brain, the left hemisphere provides the secondary matrix through its binary, computer-like method of functioning to screen further the data by comparison and reduce it to a discrete two-dimensional form. So, this piece here literally says that the right brain is a little more flexible and creative and non-linear is what it's getting at. And that's the right brain. And the left hemisphere is that logic, number crunching 1-0 side. And so that this last piece here I completely agree with. We're both. We have both of those capabilities. And they're different in every person. Some are better at one side versus the other. And therefore the combinations are different. And they've proven it, right? The connections in a female brain, the connections between the left and the right brain are there are way more connections than a male brain. Way more connections. And for good reason, in my opinion. So, 16, the evaluation. To the extent that the gateway succeeds in bringing about refinement in the energy matrix of the mind, it succeeds in expanding or altering human consciousness so that it can perceive without recourse to the intercession of the physical senses, such that ever more of the universal hologram, not of course accessible by sense perception, your five senses, not accessible that way, but accessible through this electromagnetic holographic interaction by training your left and your right brain to resonate in such a way that you transfer your seat of consciousness out of your brain, out of your body, and tap into a universal energy field to extract and or exchange information. That's what they're talking about here. Marilyn Ferguson has written that the theories of Prebium and Baum appear to account for all transcendental experience, paranormal events, and even normal perceptual oddities. She goes on to say of Prebium, currently he is proposing a startling, all-encompassing model that is generating considerable excitement among those intrigued by the mysteries of human consciousness. His holographic model marries brain research to theoretical physics. It accounts for normal perception and simultaneously takes the paranormal and transcendental experiences out of the supernatural by explaining them as part of nature. Like certain strange discoveries of quantum physics, the radial reorientation of this theory suddenly makes sense of paradoxical sayings of mystics throughout the ages. So they're trying to quantify this idea of spiritualism, of mysticism, of paranormal activity, paranormal events. It's a very, very interesting thing, right? These things have been around forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And everyone's just kind of accepted it as part of the elite class, or the priest class is the term that I'm looking for. That's what everybody that's what every society has. They have a priest class, medicine men or religious leaders or people that study the stars. And what they're getting at here is this idea that the mind is a hologram, and that there's this universal hologram, universal consciousness, kind of scientifically is starting to put some structure around these things that have been part of human civilization forever and ever and ever. I listened to something that Elon Musk put out. It was an interview with somebody, and they asked him, what question would you want to ask AI? And he sat there for a minute. I mean, it was literally like 2 minutes. He didn't really say much at all. Didn't say anything. And bear in mind, the question was, posed to him. If you could ask AI one question, what would it be? And his response was, what's outside the simulation? What is outside the simulation? In other words, what's outside the hologram that is the third dimension? Whereby you have gravity that's bleeding in, that's holding everything in place in like this puppet string type of suspension. And I use puppet string simply to create the visual illustration where everything is tied together and they're interconnected with points, etc., etc. in this giant hologram that is the simulation. Man, my computers are doing some funky stuff tonight. That's very interesting. So, 17. Self-cognition. To complete our outline of the process by which the mind achieves and exercises consciousness, we must also describe the mechanism which accounts for the aspect of human thought that differentiates it from consciousness of plants or animals. For example, this idea of self-cognition, self-awareness. Humans not only know, but they know that they know. They are able to monitor the process of their own thinking and maintain an awareness of their own thinking. Moreover, they can conduct a comparative assessment evaluating the functioning of their thought processes against various objective standards that they have adopted. Human consciousness can do this because it has the capacity to duplicate aspects of its own hologram, project them out, perceive that projection, put it through comparison with the memory aspects, where its evaluation standards of measure are stored in the memory of its own hologram, and measure or sense the differences using three-dimensional geometry and then binary go-no-go pulse to yield verbal cognition about the self. What the hell? That is some interesting stuff. So what they're getting at is that we understand, and we can observe ourselves observing. We can observe ourselves interacting. We can observe ourselves thinking. We can observe ourselves creating. So there is this dynamic interaction that occurs in our consciousness that makes us unique from other things, plants and animals. Consciousness energy grid. Look, you have 3 planes here, front to back, side to side, top to bottom. Consciousness grid. Left hemisphere acts like the mind's computer software to reduce input from the right hemisphere to verbal symbols and concepts. Interesting. The right hemisphere reduces three-dimensional holographic images to 2-dimensional go no go. That is the consciousness energy grid. Interesting. Now we're going to get into the time space dimension. We have about 30 minutes left. I hope you're still here. I can't see you. My computers are doing some very interesting things. So here we go. Time space dimension. Up to this point, our discussion of the gateway process has been relatively simple and easy to follow. Now the fun begins. Gateway involves more than just perception of those aspects of the universal hologram which can be accessed in the dimension of time-space as we know it. To explain how and why human consciousness can be brought to transcend the limitations of time and space is the next task which must be addressed. To do this, we must first appreciate what time and space are in order to understand how the dimensions that they constitute can be transcended. Physicists define them as a measurement of energy or force in motion. In other words, it is a measurement of change. However, in order for energy to be in motion, it must first be limited in some way within the confines of some sort of vibratory pattern so that its confinement gives it the capacity for being contained at a specific location, which is distinguishable from other locations in space. Whoa. So, physicists define time as a measurement of energy or force in motion. So they're defining time as energy in motion. An energy or a force in motion. And that's how they're defining time. It's a very interesting concept, right? It says here that in order for energy to be in motion, it must first be limited in some way within the confines of some vibratory pattern so that its confinement gives it the capacity for being contained at a specific location. So what they're saying is that you have to have a start point. The reason that time is because you're able to say from this instant to another instant something changed. So you have a start point. That's what they're getting at here. So energy, some sort of vibratory pattern, is confined so that it has the capacity of being contained at a specific location. It has an identifiable point that is unique and can be distinguished from other points in space. And that's how you are able to get time. Time as a measurement of energy in motion. So you have to know where it started and where it's going and where it ended. And that's what they're getting at here. Energy which is not confined is force without limit, without dimension, without the limits of form. Energy which is not confined is a force without limit, without dimension, without the limits of form. It is infinity. It cannot move because there is nothing beyond infinity. It is therefore outside the dimension of time. It is also beyond space, because that concept implies that a specific energy form is limited to a specific location. Whoa. So we're talking about energy existing that doesn't or cannot be measured with time and cannot be quantified in space because it is everywhere at the same time. That's an interesting concept. But if energy is in the state of infinity, there are no boundaries, there is no here to differentiate from there. There is no sense of area. Energy in infinity means energy uniformly extended without limit, so it's everywhere at the same time. It has no beginning, it has no end, it has no location. It is a conscious force, fundamental primal power of existence without form, a state of infinite being. Energy in infinity is said to be completely at rest and therefore cannot generate holograms so long as it remains utterly inactive. It retains its inherent capacity for consciousness in that it can receive and passively perceive holograms generated by energy in motion out in the various dimensions. The various, meaning more than one dimension, which make up the created universe, but it cannot be perceived by consciousness operating in the active universe. So this infinite energy field that is at rest is the object at rest, or the thing at rest, that everything else in motion that we understand as time and space, or can be measured relative to time and space, is interacting with. And that's how it's able to understand the hologram, because earlier we read that a hologram requires an object at rest and an object in motion to interact, to create interfering waves. Those interfering waves generate a hologram, which is nothing but advanced, highly dense information that, when observed with the right observation tool, can reveal what is in motion and what was at rest. And so that's what this is getting at. So there's multiple dimensions, and there's this universal energy that exists that's completely at rest, that interacts, or at least is to some extent influenced, and I'm paraphrasing, right, with these energy states that are in motion, which is this is crazy. Very, very abstract concepts. So, energy in this state of inactive infinity is termed by physicists as energy in the absolute state, or simply the absolute. Between the absolute and the material universe in which we experience our physical existence are various intervening dimensions to which human consciousness in altered states of being may gain access. So, mushrooms, DMT, ayahuasca, marijuana, alcohol, chanting, ritualistic things like sacrifice or dancing, mantras, repetitive anything, entrains the brain, resonates the brain in specific ways that allow interaction with various intervening dimensions. Different dimensions that don't necessarily make up things like matter. dimensions that are different than the third dimension. Something like the spirit world. Something like angels and demons. Aliens. To which the human consciousness in an altered state of being may gain access. Other various intervening dimensions that are also in motion, that are also energy states, but they are different vibrations than our third dimension. And they're saying that the human consciousness can interact with that in altered states of mind. Theoretically, human consciousness may continue to expand the horizons of its perceptual capability until it reaches the dimension of absolute, at which point perception stops, because the absolute generates no holograms of or about itself. That's very interesting. Intervening dimensions. Since the absolute is conscious energy in infinity without boundaries, it occupies every dimension to include the space-time dimension in which we have our physical existence. But we cannot perceive it. It overlays everything, as do many of the intervening gradients or dimensions through which the energies of the universe pass on their way to and from their home in a state of infinity, the absolute. To enter these intervening dimensions, human consciousness must focus with such intense coherence that the frequency of the energy pattern which comprises that consciousness, meaning the brain waves, can accelerate to the point where the resulting frequency pattern, if displayed on an oscilloscope, would look virtually like a solid line. Achievement of this state of altered consciousness sets the stage for perception of non-time-space dimensions because of the operation of principle in physics known as Planck's distance. So they can measure this stuff, folks. Hook your brain up. After they've hooked somebody's brain up who's trained in this idea of hemisphere sync in your brain, this gateway process, and be able to measure when they get their brain waves to function in a straight line rather than it being a random, jagged, up-down, squiggly line looking like somebody's writing with a pencil with Parkinson's disease. That'd be like a brainwave output. Or epilepsy. Not to be offensive, but again, I'm trying to create a visual illustration. If somebody who couldn't control their muscle movements and they shook violently were trying to draw a straight line on a piece of paper, the resultant of that attempt to draw a straight line with something like epilepsy or Parkinson's would be a simple representation of a single brainwave pattern. And what they're getting at here is that when the hemisphere brain syncs and when this gateway process is performed in such a way with such intensity, they can wire up the brain, they can measure the brain with an oscilloscope, and it creates a straight line instead of a wiggly, squiggly line. This is an aspect of quantum mechanics, which applies to the fact that any oscillating frequency, such as a brainwave, reaches 2 points of complete rest, which constitute the boundaries of each individual oscillation, movement up or movement down. Without these points of rest, an oscillating wave pattern would be impossible, since the points of rest are required to permit the energy to change direction and thus continue vibrating between rigid limits. Because it is also true that when, for an infinitesimally brief instant, that energy reaches one of its 2 points of rest, or clicks out, of time, space, and joins infinity, whoa. So, that's kind of an intense idea. So, brain wave pattern. brainwave pattern. Squiggly line, epilepsy, Parkinson's, somebody trying to draw a straight line, right? I know it's kind of a rough example, but again, trying to illustrate for you visually using words what it is we're talking about when we're talking about brainwaves. So when they're talking about this idea of brain wave or consciousness going in and out of this infinity state, what do they call it? In quantum mechanics, the oscillating frequency reaches 2 points of complete rest, which constitutes the boundary of the individual oscillation. So it says, without these points of rest, the oscillating wave pattern would be impossible, since the points of rest are required to permit the energy to change direction and thus continue vibrating between rigid limits. But this is also true that when, for an infinitesimally brief instant, that energy reaches one of its 2 points of rest and clicks out of time-space and joins infinity. So, squiggly line up, joins infinity, back into our reality, out to infinity, back into our reality, out to infinity, back into our reality, out to infinity. Right? So every time it hits the top, every time it hits the bottom, out into infinity. Every time it hits the top, every time it hits the bottom, out to infinity. That infinity consciousness field, when it's at rest, goes to the top, and as it changes to go down, bloop, it's at rest there. That's what they're getting at. That critical step out of time and space into infinity occurs when the speed of the oscillation drops below 10 with 33 zeros after it. So you have a decimal point, 0.10, 0.10 with 33 zeros after it, measured in centimeters per second, which is known as Planck's distance. To use the words of Bentov, quantum mechanics tells us that when distances go below Planck's distance, which is 0.10 with 33 zeros after it, centimeters, we enter in effect a new world. Wow. To return to our case in point, the human consciousness wave pattern reaches such high frequency that the pattern of clickouts comes so close together that there is virtually continuity in it. So you're clicked out of this dimension continuously when they can raise the brainwave patterns to a high enough frequency. Now my mind is immediately going to this idea of millimeter waves, this idea of infrared, this idea of light. The frequency spectrum that is just at the top of what is called non-ionizing radiation. Non-ionizing radiation. Radiation whereby one photon of energy in the electromagnetic spectrum, when it is applied to an atom, does not separate an electron out of the atom. An ionizing effect, ionizing radiation, I believe is greater than 12.4 electron volts per photon, which is delineated around the ultraviolet range, which is why certain wavelengths of ultraviolet are bad for you. 12.4 electron volts, I believe, is that threshold that makes the distinguishing marker, that is the distinguishing marker between ionizing and non-ionizing radiation. Non-ionizing radiation is legal to transmit, and it transmits in the non-ionizing radiation, transmits at the nanometer level. Infrared is around 800 and up, or down, nanometers. The iPhone face recognition functions around, I believe, 890 nanometers per oscillation. Why am I telling you all this? What I'm getting at is this idea that artificial electromagnetic fields or artificial electromagnetic directed energy systems could potentially interfere with the brain and enable it to become entrained. Left brain and right brain working together artificially with or without your consent to generate frequency patterns that are so close together that your consciousness clicks out of the third dimension. What does that look like to you? Do you think that that's potentially manipulating your free will? What dimension are you clicking into? And the question then becomes, are humans smart enough to be able to tune the brain to specific dimensions? What does demonic possession look like? What does the beast system look like? The prince of the air, building mechanical systems, deceiving man, and the great delusion and the great deception, being cut off from God, clicking out of your own sovereign consciousness into potentially a demonic realm, a lower vibratory dimension, so that then your meat suit, that is your organic biologic body in the third dimension, is now tapped or tied into or wired up to another dimension on a fairly ongoing basis. What do the armies of the apocalypse look like? And I ask you again, what are we? What are you doing here? Why are you here? So, it says here that clickouts happen with great frequency to the extent that there is virtual continuity in it. So they're talking about getting the brain to resonate in a very specific way at a high enough frequency to get your consciousness out into another dimension, clicking out of this dimension. Then a portion of that consciousness is actually postulated to establish and maintain its information collection function in those dimensions located between time, space, and the absolute. So they're talking about being able to take people's consciousness, get them clicked out of our dimension, put them in another dimension, absorb that information, and bring them back here, and then map those other dimensions. Map them. What do explorers do in the 21st century? Do you think it stops with putting men or women on the space station or trying to put an astronaut on the moon or Mars? Do you think that for the last 100 years that's all we've done? I submit to you the answer is no. I submit to you that this idea of the brain being this quantum interface device that can access the universal consciousness field, and the fact that we are resonant beings that can change our resonance, that we are able to be tuned. We can self-tune or be tuned. That this idea of inducing a resonant frequency or frequencies in consciousness in humans to get them to click out into other dimensions in a controlled way and then come back and be able to talk about it seems like what 21st century exploration looks like. Keep in mind this document was written in 1983. It's a long, long time ago. So, thus, at the almost continuous click-out pattern, or as the almost continuous click-out pattern establishes itself in continuous phase at speeds below Planck's distance, but before reaching that state of total rest, human consciousness passes through the looking glass of time-space after the fashion of Alice beginning her journey into Wonderland. The gateway experience, with its associated Hemi-Sync technique, is apparently designed, if used systematically and patiently, to enable human consciousness to establish a coherent pattern of perception in those dimensions where speeds below Planck's distance apply. This holds true irrespective of whether the individual is exercising his consciousness while in his physical body, or whether he is doing so after having separated that consciousness from the physical body, i.e. the so-called out-of-body state mentioned earlier. And we have 3 minutes left. We are going to stop here because the next section is, well, let's read section 20 and then we'll call it good. Subatomic particles. The behavior of subatomic particles provides an interesting example of the phenomenon of clicking out, discussed in the preceding paragraphs. In an article prepared for Science Digest magazine, Dr. John Gleedman mentions the way in which subatomic particles communicate with each other once their energy fields become entrained as a result of colliding with each other. The communication concerned is, of course, postulated through occurring during the click-out phase in the oscillation of the energy fields comprising the subatomic particles. So when you get entrained, you get in sync with somebody, you go up, down, up, down, up, down, right? Well, at the top or the bottom, you get that click-out phase, and that's what they're talking about when they get things that are intertwined or interrelated. That's the synchronization, is at the click-out phase when they tap into the common fields. And we're talking about subatomic particles in this example. It is this cause which accounts for the cross-communication at which, in terms of time and space velocities, would seem to involve speeds in excess of light. In reality, Einstein's theory of relativity is not being invalidated, but rather the communication concerned is taking place outside the dimension of time and space. So this idea of quantum entanglement, spooky action at a distance, two particles become intertwined, and no matter how far away they are, they interact with each other. And it's because of this idea of there is no time and space necessarily in other dimensions, and they're clicking out and in at the same time because they were the photons were generated at the same time, to which the theory of relativity is strictly confined. Time and space is the confinements by which the theory of relativity exists. Specifically, Dr. Gleedman tells us quantum theory postulates a kind of long-range Siamese twin effect whenever two subatomic particles collide and then go off their different ways. Even when the particles are halfway across the universe from each other, it says they instantaneously respond to each other's actions. The quantum love story, for those of you that have been paying attention for many weeks. In so doing, they violate relativity's ban on faster-than-light velocities. Indeed, regarding attempts to quantify what is known about the behavior of energy in dimensions apparently outside of time-space, Bentov speaks about courageous physicists who are working on hypothetical particles called tachyons, which can move at speeds higher than light. The speed of tachyons start just above the speed of light and range all the way to infinite velocities. With that, I will say good night.